All right. So start with introductions with our panelists. Do you guys want to do maybe like a 10-second introduction each?
Hi everyone, I'm James Cassidy. I work at KPMG Law. I'm a director and lead the data and digital regulation team. So I run a team of solicitors supporting clients around digital regulation, data protection compliance, and increasingly around the legal issues associated with the adoption of artificial intelligence.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. My name is Danielle Gilliam-Moore. I'm the Director of Global Public Policy at Salesforce, and I lead our AI and cybersecurity policy. For those who do not know about Salesforce, we are a customer relationship management company, so we help companies sell, service, and build platforms for enterprises of all sizes to help them interact better with their customers.
Hi everyone, I'm Yuval, currently at Sandbox AQ, which is an Alphabet spin-off. We deal with AI and quantum. My journey actually started here in London in a company called Skype, if any of you guys remember. Then we got acquired by Microsoft. That's where I've led actually the digital transformation over there, and that's connected to what we're going to talk about today. And then moved to Google for about 12 years, finishing with the Gemini partnerships. The first one's 2.5. This was before Gemini was that cool. And now in the Sandbox, we're trying to move away from just LLM and focusing on creating large quantitative models to explore more scientific and hard problems. So that's my slightly over 10-second intro.
Thank you. So we're in an environment now where everyone's been spending the last few years thinking, how do we implement AI? And the focus probably has been less on compliance. I think from a governmental regulatory perspective, there's a debate around stifling kind of competitiveness and innovation with regulation. And so for a lot of companies, there's a lot of confusion around different rules, different countries. How do we manage this? So I want to start with a question for the panel. Danielle, maybe you can go first. What do you think is the single biggest point of confusion for companies trying to comply with AI laws right now?
Yeah, and if I could actually slightly disagree with how you first set up this question, I'm so sorry, I'm a little argumentative on this issue. I think that we got to this point of seeing AI as a driver of economic growth. That was a hard-won realization on the parts of governments. I think when we first came to this issue, there was a rush to regulate. And so I think one of the biggest things that is has been the issue for companies is watching governments globally go through kind of this like growth spurt or realization that first there was deep concern over safety. Now there's this acknowledgement of growth and the economic opportunity of AI, and now we're seeing this really interesting turn and pivot into security and being really concerned about how do we secure AI. So I think for companies, it's trying to figure out where are the compliance costs actually going to come from? Is it going to be the EU, or is it going to be the US? Is it going to be state level? Is it going to be a federal? What's happening in APAC? How do we figure this out? How do we sort this out?
No, it's a fair point. I think even in the UK, they changed the name of the AI Safety Committee to the AI Security Committee. Even with the EU AI Act, I think was it recently, there was the Digital Omnibus that unwound the timelines, they delayed the timelines. I mean, James, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I think the CEO of Google announced in the last 6 months that from their kind of workings out, they think there are over 1,000 new laws in draft trying to regulate AI across the globe. So that's different states, legislatures, demonstrating that there is a wave of regulation coming. The UK took a response to say we're not going to regulate just yet. We haven't got a law. Go and use AI as much as you can, providing you're doing it in accordance with the other laws at the moment. But it is, reality is that there will be a wave of regulation coming. So I think the biggest complexity or the question is how do you start to adopt responsibly, knowing that regulation will come, and how do you try and work out what that position needs to be? As you've said already, that the EU are put in a law. As soon as it was put in, it was kind of out of date, so they're now having to uplift it before it's fully in force already. And the reality is we're in a situation where the tech will continue to move far quicker than the law or guidance can ever catch up. And that is a very interesting part of all of this, is that you just don't have the ability to put in a framework for everyone to understand, because AI is just a moving target at the moment. So I think that's the question, is how do you possibly try and work out where to start when you don't know what you're trying to comply with?
And if I could just quickly just double tap to give the audience a bit of an example. At the state level, at first there was this rush to do a comprehensive AI regulation, and then there was a battle between them and the Trump administration. And so now you're watching states try to figure out this like chat bot, this companion bot, which is why James's presentation and how much people are using AI for companionship is so concerning. But they're trying to define what is a companion chat bot. Those definitions sometimes then loop in agents. Agents and companion chatbots are not the same thing. And so then you have companies like Salesforce and other enterprise-side companies kind of having a slight meltdown over these laws that potentially might pass at the state level that are aimed at companion chatbots, but because of overbroad definitions, now are taking in an entirely larger part of the waterfront of the AI value chain than they ever really intended. I mean, if you talk to them, they don't intend for this regulation to take in everything, but because the definition is so broad, it just happens to do it.
Yuval, what are your thoughts on this?
Yes, so I think so far in all the discussion that we had over here, we talked about how transformation AI is and how it really completely changes the way we need to think. But we're not really changing the way we think about regulation. We're talking about rules and committees and all that. That's not going to fly with the pace of AI. So what do you do with that information when you know that regulation can never really catch up with that level of intelligence, of that level of technology? You protect yourself as much as possible. So you move it into a company perspective level. If you wait for the state or for the government to tell you what the framework is, you're going to be too late. And that's why a lot of large enterprises are finding it difficult because they're moving much slower, whereas small companies that are already developed into an agentic sort of platform or way of working is much faster. The other issue with it, practically, if you don't know how many agents you have and what are they doing in your company, what the ROI is and so on, how can you regulate something that you don't know even exists or you can't even see? So there's a lot of practical problems to that. And last thing that I'll mention, I don't know if anyone captured it in the news, but Argentina, for example. So AI is becoming a geopolitical issue as well. So wherever there's going to be more regulation and more limitations on those companies are going to stay away from that and go somewhere else. So Argentina is now saying, no regulation whatsoever, all in on AI. You know their president, Milei, fuera, and all that stuff. So he's doing the same thing with AI, and that's an opportunity. And Tropi came out and said, we need to sort of stop, we're moving too fast, but nobody's going to stop. Nobody's going to get out of that race. So it is I think it's a very difficult question. Regulation itself is difficult, but we need just to think about it slightly differently.
I mean, so you raise an interesting point there. So, you mentioned that companies should be pragmatic. It's almost impossible to keep up with this. So, practically speaking, how should a company manage conflicting rules in different jurisdictions if you are operating across multiple borders?
So I'll say this. The hard thing about this entire situation is that I think the large multinational companies, we do have the compliance budgets to kind of deal with this. And I think it's more, and it'll still be hard, right? Especially if you have definitions that are improperly written and create confusion. But if you look at, down the value chain or even just smaller companies, not everyone has a fleet of lawyers or an army of lawyers to deal with the compliance costs. So I think that is certainly, that's an issue in and of itself, is worrying about entrenching certain companies that are able to just pay for the compliance.
Yeah, I mean, I run a startup, so we sell to multinationals and enterprise clients. I think one of the things that we've been seeing, so we have our contracts. We're an AI company. We're speaking to a multinational about implementing our solutions, and it goes to the legal or compliance team, and they end up redlining everything around data, and they're saying you can't use our data with your AI tools. But AI doesn't work without the data. That's the whole reason the client or prospects approached us to have this discussion. So there is a lot of education, I guess, and back and forth around how, is there communication within a big company around why are we procuring this company? Is this compliant? If we implement this tool, what is the wider impact across, tens of thousands of people around the world in our workforce, for example? So there's still a lot of unknowns and confusion. Practically speaking, how does this work? So, I mean, James, coming to you, how should companies internally think about building a an internal compliance framework to deal with this?
So I think the word that's used a lot is responsible, and I think Yusuf in the previous panel talked about accountable, and I think it's at the moment regulators are going to expect a business to take a proportionate approach, and that's a word that is used in data protection compliance and lots of other legal frameworks around acknowledging that not every business will need to take the same approach. Some businesses have huge compliance budgets, other businesses won't have any one at all associated with it. So it's a matter of identifying where the risks are, and I think being able to demonstrate you'd thought about them responsibly. I think the businesses that are doing it well are mapping their AI use cases very carefully, understanding what their use cases are themselves, where they are using third parties who may be changing their processes or augmenting their services with AI. So you're giving them your data, as you talked about, what is happening to that data. Understanding that, and it's the point you made about the fact that if you don't know where your data is and you don't know what AI is doing with that data, you can't ever be compliant. So that mapping process, I think, is vital. The second one is that it's a matter of then identifying a suitable risk profile. I think businesses, again, who are trying to get themselves on the front foot in the face of ever-changing technology and ever-changing legal expectations are setting a kind of risk appetite, getting the right stakeholders involved, maybe drawing lines in the sand to say we won't use AI for this. You can potentially work out use cases that are not going to be high risk at all, and therefore the legal risks associated will be far lower. As soon as you start putting personal data in there, as soon as you start making decisions about people using AI, the risks start to increase, and you can draw those lines in the sand, which still allows you to innovate and use the technology without the kind of increased risk. And then I think it's a matter of roles and responsibilities and being very clear. So no matter what the scale of the business is, everyone needs to understand that AI is relevant to them, and if they're using it or doing stuff with it, it's not just a checkbox, I've done my training online. It is developing a suite of policies for people to understand what they should be doing, and that isn't something that is then, you do a yearly training and you don't look at it again. It is something that is evolving and changes. The tech changes as the regulatory expectations change as well, to make sure you can be as agile as possible, because the tech is, and you therefore need your compliance process to try and keep up with that.
Yeah, I think one of the key challenges which we've touched on already is just the pace of development, and I think a few other panels mentioned it as well. I mean, with things evolving so quickly, we're talking about regulators can't keep up, but how do companies themselves keep up? So if we are going to be implementing policies and ongoing training, that's a lot of resource. And going back to Danielle's point, the larger companies maybe do have the budgets to kind of put resource on it, ironically put people on it, or I don't know, maybe you do put AI on it.
All of the above.
I mean, Yuval, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I think the approach that was mentioned in terms of having principles and framework is the right approach. If you have too many rules and set of rules, I mean, models are coming every week and every month and are challenging and bringing in sort of new challenges. You can't set up rules for that. It doesn't move that fast. And I think looking at what we've done at Google, I mean, if we focused on those rules, we wouldn't, some of the products that we had so many compliance and issues about have become not relevant anymore. A lot of the SaaS solutions, they're moving away. So we can't work at the speed of regulation. And I gave an example. I spoke with someone here before. It's like you have a team of runners, and you've got AI and the technology, and it's running ahead, but all the team needs to be together. If we move at the speed of regulation and compliance, we're going to miss the boat, and there's other sort of considerations at play. There are considerations from a political level, from a country level, and so on and so forth. And when we're reaching this rapid, recursive self-improvement of these algorithms themselves, I think one way to actually tackle that is actually use AI as well. So train those agents as regulators, as compliance, as your own, in a way, guardrail alongside what we traditionally have. And in a way, to your point, some organizations, Google is one of them, have a fleet of lawyers and regulators and compliance people. I don't actually see that as an advantage in the coming future. I think those that are nimble could move faster. Go on, Danielle.
Yuval, are you trying to put me out of a job? I'm just...
No, it's a good point. I mean, coming back to your earlier point around Anthropic, putting out a statement that we should pause all development on frontier models. I mean, do you think that's genuine? Is it because they're about to IPO? And
A lot of people have asked that, right? Anthropic came out with all these doomsday approach, and a lot of people think it's smart marketing. I think there's some of that, But in reality, when we look at the technology, there is a danger and concern of that. Now, we've recently actually launched a partnership with Anthropic. Again, the issue overall is that all these LLMs, they're based on words and letters, which are very much a human construct. They could be very convincing, but they could be very deceitful. What we're trying sort of to focus on is something which is more focused on maths and numbers, because it's harder to deceive a mathematical constant. So I think there's some of that as well, because also the other thing to consider, there's a lot of failures of AI agentic platform in large enterprises. And the question is, so where does all this value eventually go to? All this stock market, all these AI chips and all that. It goes into the value chain of AI. It goes into those magnificent seven. It goes into those companies that are creating this technology. And that's not really democratizing anything. It doesn't democratize intelligence. It doesn't sort of share the wealth of it. And that is something for people to consider, because we're so hyped about this technology, which is super exciting. But ultimately, where does the value go? Where does it come from? Especially when nowadays a lot of companies are saying actually hiring people is actually a cheaper option with all the compute that we need to spend, because we're still blind to how much it costs, and we haven't really structured and put a good plan of how to use agents at work.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a balance right now where there's a lot of unknown, so it's experimentation, right? And obviously, the bigger the company, the more you can spend and take the hit to understand where the gains are. When you're a smaller company, it's a balance. So just going a bit off piece, we didn't discuss this before, James, but I'm going to throw a question at you. So we're talking about being pragmatic, using this technology, innovating, and I know the implementation of the EUI Act, like some of the things coming into force, has been slightly delayed, but like when you think about it, I can't remember the exact number, but I think the EUI Act said fines can be up to 7% of annual gross revenue.
Yeah, I mean, it shows how seriously they're taking it, and what they're trying to do is rule out high-risk use cases. If you look at what the legislation is trying to do across the globe, it's either rule out high-risk AI, so you're not doing anything that could have huge detrimental harms to people, making sweeping generalizations about the law, but effectively, because we like the detail as lawyers, who have got a bad rap so far today, I'm going to say, just the one person in the room. Yeah, but I think, so we want clarity, and I think what the law is trying to give clarity is if you get this wrong, there's potentially serious repercussions. It'd be really interesting to see how it gets regulated across data protection, for example. They can fine up to 4% of global turnover, and they've been fined in the billions in Europe for Amazon and Amazon, I think, got the biggest fine. So, massive amounts of money, but that has actually not been enforced anywhere near as much as the people thought it would be. Certainly in the UK, the fines have been relatively small in comparison, still hundreds of millions, but not enforced with the same level of vigour that they thought it would. And I wonder, once the EU AI Act is in full force and it starts getting regulated and enforcement comes out, I think lots of businesses are waiting for that to happen, and then we'll hope that it's not them that gets the first enforcement and then respond, because at the moment, as you said, how when you don't know what you're trying to do, how can you build a compliance program when you don't know where it starts and ends? So I think that regulatory approach is the fines are so high because the impact of getting AI wrong is potentially catastrophic, and businesses are starting to look at not only from the kind of financial harms that can come for it, but also setting that risk appetite should take into account all sorts of different ways of looking at it. So you look at harm to an individual. If AI means they don't get selected for a job when they should have been in the mix because it's biased, the harm to that person is, how do you quantify that compared to getting fined millions of pounds? So I think what we will see is people waiting for clarification from regulators. The first regulatory action that comes out, the first fine, everyone will leap and respond to that and say, well, what lessons can we learn from that? That's not a great way to regulate. You want to be very clear what your expectations are and then respond when people don't meet those expectations. I think we're slightly back to front simply because it moves so quickly that we're going to have to wait for a regulator to step in and say, that was inappropriate. These are the reasons why I'm going to fine you. And everyone else will then have to benchmark themselves as to what does that mean for us. But we should get more expertise in regulators who haven't ever regulated this before. The courts haven't ever regulated it before. So all those things are having to catch up. So that's why this is all a very, very difficult thing to pin down.
I also want to just provide an example also that, is under Annex 3, like employment, for example, is high risk. Within that, let's say you use AI to filter resumes, not eliminate resumes, just filter, see who you have applying to the job. That's high risk. And so to your point, I think there is going to be a kind of a wait and see, because is resume filtering really, like, with our common understanding of what a high risk decision might be, is resume filtering really high risk? So it just leaves a lot have to work through and see if this really, do they really mean resume filtering is high risk?
Yeah, and I think it's the glossary of how you define risk. It goes back to
Yeah.
that definitions. Is it just one person doesn't get put forward for a job, or is it biased towards a certain category of person, or all these different things can be looked at through different lenses. And I think it's until we get that clarity as to what is the relevant, what are the relevant lenses, because it's more than one. It's still very much, as you say, it doesn't feel that risky, but you can see why looking at different perspectives it could be.
So practically speaking, look at the definitions in the EU AI Act for what is high risk, then put your own interpretation on it and decide.
Go to lawyers for your interpretation of that.
Go to James.
Keeping lawyers employed.
That's what it sounds like. And to that point, I think the biggest risk of AI that I think doesn't get enough sort of attention is the politicization of AI. And I don't mean by countries or companies, but the fact that the algorithm itself, some of the human malevolence element gets leaked into the algorithm itself. So if you think about intelligence as a whole, there's multiple types of intelligence. There's a biological intelligence, which is ours. This is an human ingenuity intelligence. It's not built based on evolution that we have. It doesn't in a way have the innate political dynamics that we as humans have. But it's starting to learn that. And I think that's by far the biggest danger, because you're creating such a powerful technology and entity or species or whatever. If it goes rogue on you, you've got a problem. And I think we're already seeing that. The frontier labs themselves are saying that. And I think the advantage of this technology is keeping it as is. Almost like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Data from Star Trek. No emotion, no politics, no agenda, no nothing, but he's very much artificial intelligence. That's what I think we should do with artificial intelligence. Keep it good as what it is, and then it can become our guardrail to be really a truth-seeking algorithm as opposed to increasing or magnifying our own biases.
So kind of touching on that, but going actually to politics. I mean, Daniel, you've spent time working in the US Senate. I mean, do you think part of the challenge here is more politics than policy?
Yeah, I think this is a deeply political issue, and I don't know whether to be shocked by it or not shocked at all by it. But for some examples, if you looked at Bletchley, that was very kumbaya-y. Like, the countries all came together, they were all on the stairs, there's the declaration, great. I don't really remember South Korea, it was a haze. But then moving into Paris, it became really clear that that AI is now a political issue and an issue of a geopolitical issue, to your point, and it's an issue of dominance. I have a zillion and one examples, and if you want to be bored to death, please come talk to me after. But the Chinese government came out saying that they wanted to have a global standards body, I think headquartered in Shanghai. Americans freaked out about that. There's also this sovereignty now element to it. So we saw that the UK is going to develop their own sovereign model. The Canadian government has thrown their weight behind Cohere. The US government, of course, has thrown their weight behind their champions. APAC, when you do meetings in APAC, they're trying to figure out where can they get their slice of the growth, but then also just the dominance. And so for me as a little humble policy person, it's I'm ready to talk about the definitions, roles and responsibilities, liability, and some governments are just looking straight through me like, I don't care. I want to win. I want the dollars to roll into my economy. I want the jobs. I want the notoriety. It's incredible.
It's not just the governments, it's the companies themselves.
Oh, yeah, that goes without saying.
It's power, it's dominance. These are all sort of human issues, human traits.
I do think if I can, though, have one little bright point for us policy people, for companies like Salesforce, like others, there is a delicate balance, though, to strike here. The need for regulation or standards or frameworks, it creates trust. It creates a way for us to demonstrate that we are thinking about where to put humans in the loop, or the human cost of developing AI. Transparency, how to protect children in the online space. So without some form of AI governance, it doesn't allow companies to differentiate themselves in the space that we're really trying to think really closely about data security practices and things like that. So there needs to be some amount of, maybe not regulation, but governance around, so that companies are able to demonstrate that they're thinking about this. I think that's an important piece of this amongst this discussion of geopolitical dominance and economic dominance, that there needs to still be areas of global alignment and interoperability to help this grow. If countries are too concerned about sovereignty and too concerned about developing their own approach to AI regulation to benefit their incumbents, I think you run the risk of actually harming the growth of AI itself. So it's a delicate balance.
Yeah, no, I think just from my tuppence worth is that the sovereignty issues are incredibly complicated, and you can try and make it sovereign, but effectively it's a global thing, and data needs to move everywhere, and therefore it's a global problem to try and work out how do you strike that balance between keeping the politics out of it to the extent that you should, and having the right level of governance where you can get that clarity. And even if we don't get it for a while, because the law is going to take a while to develop, some international standards, acceptance across the board as to what is right and wrong, there's a huge grey area in between, but where you can you want responsible regulators to start stepping up, and even in the space where we don't get the full clarity, setting out their expectations clearly, I think balance that political issue, so you are being led by what the regulators expect, not by what the politicians or the big businesses want.
And if I could do a pitch for the larger companies in the audience, I encourage you all to look at the OECD, the Hiroshima AI process. They built a framework and a reporting framework that allows companies to kind of send in their answers about how they're performing transparency, data security, cybersecurity practices, and it adds a layer of transparency that's globally interoperable. I would encourage you all to look at that and participate. Mechanisms like that, if private industry really champions that, it is a substantive way to try and demonstrate that we are thinking about this, and that regulators should think about this in a more collaborative and interoperable manner, not just super siloed.
Cool. We've got about 2 minutes left, so I'm going to go to the last question. 1 minute, or 45 seconds each. What's one practical step our audience here can take to keep the AI strategy adaptable as policies continue to evolve? Start with Yuval.
Yes, I would say if you want to implement AI in your organization, I would say nobody has a solution. You can't just buy it off the shelf. If they're selling that to you, they're selling you something else. I think the way to do that is a partnership. You go with the company, you build that trust between you, and you work together for the specific solution for you. Off the shelf doesn't really work as well as anymore. I think that's the best approach. Get the observability, get your risk appetite right, and get it sort of working. The other thing is you need to understand that you need to change the hierarchy. I mean, working and implementing agentic AI type of company into the current hierarchy and the old org structure doesn't work. It's like implementing a Mythos model on a Commodore 64 computer. It would break. And I think one of the reasons that we don't see that implementation working so far is because nobody wants to break that sort of approach and structure and hierarchy, because there's too many people at risk from that perspective. But I think it's going to come anyway.
Great. Tanya?
I would say, government affairs, public policy, we're generally not a corner that people proactively think about until a regulator comes knocking with like big fines. I would encourage everyone to think about that a little bit differently. Right now, a lot of regulators, lawmakers, do not understand this moment. They see the potential of it, but they don't see how complicated it can be. So I'm encouraging everyone, tell your stories, go talk to regulators, go talk to lawmakers before you're in trouble, and tell them what you're doing. How do you fit into the AI value chain? What makes you different? What makes you the same? why is this guidance not work for you? I think we need to be thinking more about education, not just of employee bases and AI literacy, but of lawmakers themselves. They don't know what they don't know, and so we should all be thinking about trying to educate them. And that's, yes, a naked plea for more public policy people.
And then I think mine probably follows on, which I think is you should act now, even though we don't have the clarity that people might want. There are still things that you should be doing around, transparency, as you say, being, once you know what you're doing with it, making people aware of what you're being open and honest about what you're doing with AI. Roles and responsibilities make it very clear to everyone in the business what they should or shouldn't be doing. And I think it's much better to have done a few small steps and try to build some sort of framework that demonstrates that you are a responsible business than wait for the clarity which may never come because it's just going to keep moving.
So I guess it's very unclear at the moment what's happening. There's a lot of uncertainty. So practically speaking, keep using AI, doing what you're doing, but do it in a way where you track why you're doing certain things within risk, and ultimately collaborate within your organizations, collaborate with policymakers, and hopefully we can all help define where this goes in the future together. Thank you very much.